They were never meant to be powerful. Tiny countries, hidden institutions, names you've barely heard. Yet they move billions across invisible wires. And when global markets crash, they profit first because behind every financial storm, behind every unexpected collapse, lies an unseen network of small nation-state banks, quietly steering the tides of global money. They don't sit in New York or London, but in the shadows of history's most neutral places: Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Malta, Singapore. These aren't just banks. They are control nodes in the world's financial bloodstream. The question is, who built this system? And what happens when the smallest players hold the biggest power? What if global finance isn't ruled by Wall Street or the Federal Reserve, but by a silent network of small, sovereign banks, operating under diplomatic immunity, secret treaties, and offshore laws written in their favor? This is not conspiracy. It's the hidden architecture of money, built piece by piece since the end of World War II, from Swiss vaults that held Nazi gold to the Central Bank of Luxembourg quietly managing trillions in euro-denominated assets, to Singapore's transformation into the safe haven for digital money and crypto wealth. Each small state became a silent node in a web that bypasses regulations, sanctions, and sometimes even nations themselves. And in times of crisis, when currencies collapse and great powers fall, this network doesn't break. It thrives. This is the story of how small nation-state banks secretly shape global monetary crises. It began in the ashes of war. 1944, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. As the world rebuilt from the ruins of World War II, global leaders gathered to design a new financial order, one that would prevent another Great Depression, another war born of economic collapse. But behind the grand speeches and signatures, something subtle was set in motion. A two-tier system. One visible, one invisible. On the surface stood the giants: the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and later the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. They became the official guardians of global money. Yet, in the shadows, small neutral states, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, the Cayman Islands, saw an opportunity. While the big powers created order, the small ones built escape routes. Switzerland had perfected the art of secrecy since the 1930s. Numbered accounts, anonymous deposits, no questions asked. Luxembourg, though barely the size of a city, began offering tax-free corporate banking structures that quietly attracted European capital. Liechtenstein, population 40,000, became a haven for shell companies holding fortunes larger than its GDP. And as global trade expanded, this secret layer of the financial world became the insurance policy for the elite. Money could move beyond borders, beyond law, beyond accountability. When the official system was designed to be transparent, the hidden one was built to be untouchable. Because in the New World Order, it wasn't just about who made the money, it was about who could hide it. By the 1970s, the secret network had evolved from a handful of offshore banks into an invisible empire. When the US dollar was detached from gold in 1971, money became an abstraction, a promise backed by trust alone. And the moment that happened, small nation-state banks realized something. If money was now digital, invisible, and borderless, they could become gatekeepers of this new illusion. The first shock came in 1974, the Herstatt crisis in Germany. A small bank failed during a foreign exchange settlement, triggering panic across global markets. But the real revelation wasn't the failure itself, it was the reaction. Central banks coordinated emergency measures, revealing just how interlinked the world's money had become. Through hidden offshore accounts, untraceable deposits, and unregulated financial flows. Then came the eurodollar market, trillions of dollars circulating outside the United States, sitting in small European banks, completely beyond the Fed's reach. These dollars financed oil trades, corporate debt, and even covert wars, all through private banking systems in Switzerland, the Channel Islands, and the Caribbean. In the 1980s, another pattern emerged. During the Latin American debt crisis, billions flowed through offshore channels, bypassing official systems. When Mexico defaulted, Western banks didn't collapse, because their losses were already hidden in offshore subsidiaries. The same happened in 1997, during the Asian financial crisis. Hot money, short-term speculative capital, fled Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea overnight, draining economies dry. Much of that capital came from accounts managed by small state banks, operating through shell firms and derivative trades invisible to regulators. And yet, after each collapse, the system became stronger, not weaker. Each crisis taught these nations how to better conceal, coordinate, and profit from global instability. They had learned a powerful truth. Every collapse creates two victims, and one winner. The public loses wealth, the nations lose stability, but the network gains power. Because in chaos, money seeks safety. And safety in this system means secrecy. Today, the invisible network no longer hides in dusty ledgers or Caribbean vaults. It lives inside servers, digital exchanges, and central bank balance sheets. What began as offshore secrecy has evolved into monetary influence without accountability. The world's most powerful currencies, the dollar, the euro, the yuan, are constantly being recycled, rehypothecated, and hidden in systems controlled by smaller nations with disproportionate financial clout. Consider this. In 2023, more than 11 trillion in global assets were held in offshore financial centers. Tiny nations, with populations smaller than mid-sized cities, now manage wealth larger than entire continents. Luxembourg, for instance, holds over $5 trillion in funds, quietly servicing global banks. The Cayman Islands, with fewer than 70,000 residents, process more than 75% of the world's hedge funds. And Singapore, once a small trading post, is now the Switzerland of Asia, controlling capital flows between China, the US, and Europe. They are not rogue players. They are strategic nodes. Their central banks collaborate silently with major powers, providing what the system cannot survive without: trust and deniability. When sanctions hit Russia in 2022, billions quietly moved through Dubai, Hong Kong, and Singapore, far from Western oversight. When the crypto markets collapsed, regulators traced the flows, only to find that much of the missing money had passed through small, compliant banks in jurisdictions where laws favor opacity over accountability. And now, as nations prepare for central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, these same small state banks are positioning themselves again as intermediaries between the new digital currencies of superpowers. They are the choke points of modern finance, deciding who gets access to liquidity and who gets cut off. Their power lies not in armies or oil, but in flow. The flow of capital, data, and trust. We live in an era where a policy decision in a microstate can shift global markets overnight. Because the real empire isn't geographic anymore, it's financial, and its borders are drawn not by nations, but by networks. The warning every empire in history has believed it could control its own collapse. But money has a law of nature. It moves faster than power can adapt. And today, that law is accelerating. The network of small state banks and offshore monetary hubs has grown too large, too interconnected, too vital to fail. A single cyber attack, a diplomatic fallout, a liquidity shock, and the chain begins to unravel. Imagine this. A digital glitch inside one of the clearing banks in Singapore freezes dollar settlements for just a few hours. Traders panic. Automated systems begin to dump currencies. Within minutes, $2 trillion in assets vanish from digital ledgers. By the end of the day, global stock markets have lost over 8% of their value. This isn't fiction. It's the reality that central bankers now whisper about behind closed doors. In 2022, a BIS report quietly acknowledged that cross-border liquidity dependencies present systemic risks. In plain language, that means if one of these small nodes fails, the global system follows. But the true danger isn't technical, it's political. Because when nations realize how much of their money is trapped in this invisible network, the instinct will be to pull back, to wall off reserves, to demand control. And that, ironically, is how monetary globalization ends. Not with rebellion, but with retreat. A slow, self-inflicted unwinding of trust. Every empire that fell believed it could reset the system. The Romans clipped their coins. The British devalued the pound. And now, in our digital age, superpowers believe they can simply reprogram money itself. But if history has taught us anything, it's this. You can't reset trust. Once it breaks, the collapse spreads faster than any policy, faster than any rescue fund. And when that day comes, the world will discover that the smallest nations, the ones that seemed too minor to matter, were the ones holding the threads of the global web all along. Every financial age ends with the same illusion, that this time, we're smarter than history. But behind the glass towers and digital ledgers lies the same fragile truth. Money is not built on value. It's built on trust. And trust can vanish in an instant. Today, the real power in the global system doesn't rest in Washington or Beijing. It rests in the silent circuits of offshore banks, in the encrypted networks of digital settlements, in the policy rooms of tiny nations whose names barely appear in headlines. They've become the unseen keepers of liquidity, the invisible regulators of risk, the quiet architects of how global wealth moves. And when this system fractures, whether by design or by accident, we may see the first truly borderless financial collapse. No empire to blame, no nation to rescue it, just a network, unwinding itself. History has a rhythm, a pattern that never changes. Control creates complexity. Complexity creates chaos, and chaos resets control. So the real question isn't if the next collapse will come, but who will be ready when it does. Because the next world order won't be built by armies or by governments, but by who controls the code behind the currency. And when the lights flicker in the next crisis, when markets freeze and headlines scream unprecedented, the truth will whisper beneath it all. The system didn't fail. It simply evolved without permission.